The crack of gunfire echoed across the barren Afghan mountains. 3 Navy SEALs lay wounded behind scattered rocks, their blood darkening the dust. Lieutenant James Collins pressed himself against a boulder, frantically trying to reach command on a radio that emitted nothing but static. The Taliban fighters were closing in from 3 sides, and the team's ammunition was running dangerously low. "We're trapped," whispered Petty Officer Wilson, his face pale from blood loss where a bullet had torn through his shoulder. Emma Rivera, the quiet logistics specialist, who had joined their convoy at the last minute, crawled between the wounded men, her medical kit open beside her. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she applied a tourniquet to Wilson's arm. Her face spattered with blood showed no emotion. "Radios are fried," Collins muttered, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Air support won't know where to find us." Emma raised her head, scanning the ridgeline with a calculating gaze that seemed oddly tactical for someone whose job was supposedly inventory management. She glanced at the fallen body of Chief Petty Officer Daniels, the team's sniper, who lay motionless 10 yards away, his M40A5 sniper rifle still clutched in his lifeless hands. Without a word, Emma finished bandaging Wilson, then began crawling toward Daniels' body. "Rivera, get back here," Collins hissed. "What the hell are you doing?" She ignored him, moving with a strange fluidity that spoke of training far beyond basic combat courses. Reaching Daniels, she carefully slid the rifle from his grip, checking the chamber with practiced motions that raised immediate questions in Collins's mind. Taking position behind a small outcropping, Emma settled the rifle against her shoulder with a familiarity that stunned the remaining SEALs. Her posture changed instantly, feet planted, body angled properly, breathing controlled and even. Through the scope, she tracked the movement of fighters advancing along the eastern ridge. "That thing weighs 15 pounds fully loaded," Wilson said incredulously. "She can't possibly." 3 shots cracked in rapid succession. Through his binoculars, Collins watched in disbelief as 3 Taliban fighters dropped each with a single bullet to the head. The shots had been taken at approximately 800-meter shots that only a handful of snipers in the entire military could make consistently. "Who the hell are you?" Collins asked when Emma crawled back to their position. Emma's eyes, usually downcast and unremarkable, met his with a steely gaze that seemed to belong to someone else entirely. "Just a logistics specialist who got lucky, sir," she replied flatly, returning to treat the wounded, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But Lieutenant Collins knew better. The woman treating his men wasn't just a support specialist who had gotten lucky. She was something else entirely, something that, according to official records, didn't exist. Fort Bragg, North Carolina. 6 weeks earlier, Emma Rivera sat motionless in the corner of the military hospital waiting room, her left arm in a sling and bandages wrapped tightly around her ribs. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everyone in a sickly institutional glow. A wall-mounted television silently played footage of the president visiting troops in Germany, the closed captioning lagging several seconds behind the video. She had been waiting for 3 hours, but her face betrayed no impatience. Complaining wasn't something she did anymore. The accident had happened 2 weeks ago during what was officially logged as a routine rappelling drill at the Eastern Training Grounds. What was supposed to be a simple exercise turned catastrophic when her rope snapped 20 feet above the rocky terrain below. She had hit the ground hard, breaking 2 ribs and dislocating her shoulder. Her commanding officer had ordered her to seek medical attention only after she had attempted to continue with the exercise, despite obvious injuries. The emergency room doctor had been astonished by her pain tolerance. She had sat quietly during his examination, answering his questions with simple yes or no responses. When he explained that she would need surgery to properly reset her shoulder, she had simply nodded and asked when she could return to duty. Now, as she waited for her follow-up appointment, Emma found herself thinking about how she had ended up here. Growing up in a small town in Texas with 3 older brothers had taught her early that staying quiet was often the safest option. Her father, a Desert Storm veteran who had never quite left the war behind, drank to silence his demons. On those nights, Emma would retreat to her room with books about faraway places and brave soldiers who served with honor, the kind of soldier her father had been before the war changed him. Her decision to join the Army had surprised everyone. Her high school guidance counselor had suggested nursing or teaching careers deemed more suitable for someone so soft-spoken. But Emma had other plans. She wanted to prove she was stronger than everyone believed. She wanted to serve her country and find the courage she felt was missing from her life. Basic training had been brutal. While other recruits broke down crying or fought back with angry words, Emma simply absorbed the punishment silently. She completed every exercise, followed every order, and never once complained. Her drill sergeant had taken to calling her Ghost because she moved through training like a silent shadow, always present, but never drawing attention to herself. After basic, Emma had been assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division, specializing in logistics and supply management. It wasn't glamorous work, but she approached it with quiet determination, working longer hours than required and volunteering for extra duties. Her squad leader, Sergeant Rodriguez, often told other NCOs that Private Rivera was the most reliable soldier he had ever supervised. What no one knew, what almost no one was allowed to know, was that Emma's assignment to logistics was simply a cover. 3 months after joining the 82nd Airborne, she had been approached by a plainclothes officer who offered her an opportunity to serve her country in ways few soldiers ever could. The program had no official name, but those few who knew of its existence called it Ghost Protocol. The waiting room doors swung open and a nurse called Emma's name. She stood carefully favoring her injured side and followed the woman down a corridor lined with motivational posters about military service and sacrifice. Through a window, Emma could see soldiers drilling on the parade ground, their movements precise and coordinated. The examination room was small and clinical, with a single window overlooking the base. As she waited for the doctor, Emma thought about her future. The injury would set back her training schedule, potentially jeopardizing her position in the program. Success in the military meant everything to her. It was her chance to prove her worth in a way she had never been able to do growing up. The door opened and Emma straightened instinctively. Instead of the Army doctor, she expected a tall man in Navy camouflage fatigues entered. The trident insignia on his uniform identified him as a SEAL, and the medical caduceus indicated his role as a medic. His tanned face bore the subtle lines of someone who had spent years squinting against desert sun and sea glare. Petty Officer First Class Ryan Blackwood. He introduced himself, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in crisis situations. I'll be taking over your case while Dr. Mercer is deployed. Emma nodded but remained silent, taking in every detail about the man. His movements were fluid and economical, the kind of efficiency that came from operating in environments where wasted motion could mean death. A thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing beneath his collar. His hands, steady and strong, showed the calluses of someone intimately familiar with both weapons and medical instruments. You're probably wondering why a Navy medic is treating Army personnel at Fort Bragg, Ryan said as he reviewed her chart. I'm temporarily assigned here while recovering from my own deployment injuries. Emma noticed the slight stiffness in his left shoulder, an injury he was masking well, but not well enough to escape her trained observation. Syria, she asked quietly. Something flickered in Ryan's eyes, surprised perhaps that she had correctly identified where he'd been injured. Few people outside special operations circles knew about the SEAL deployments in Syria. That's classified, he replied evenly, a hint of curiosity in his tone. But let's focus on you, Private Rivera. Ryan began his examination methodically, testing her range of motion and checking the surgical incisions. As he worked, Emma noticed him paying attention to details most doctors would miss: the calluses on her hands, the definition of her muscles, the way she controlled her breathing during painful movements. Your physical conditioning is impressive for a logistics specialist, he remarked casually. What's your PT score? 296, Emma answered, keeping her voice neutral despite the implied question. A near-perfect PT score was unusual for someone in a non-combat role. Ryan nodded, making a note in her file. And these older injuries? He asked, indicating several faint scars on her forearms that resembled knife wounds. Training accident, she replied automatically, the standard answer she had been instructed to give. As the examination continued, Ryan's questions became more pointed, more specific questions that suggested he was looking for something beyond standard medical information. He asked about her sleep patterns, her pain management techniques, her recovery training regimen. Each question seemed designed to extract information she had been trained not to provide. Emma answered minimally, giving away nothing beyond what would appear in a normal medical file. But she could feel the tension building between them, the unspoken recognition that they were engaged in a dance of information and misdirection. The breakthrough came when Ryan mentioned that he had noticed her reading a field manual on advanced tactical medicine in the waiting room, material that required security clearance and specialized training to access. Borrowed it from a friend, Emma said, breaking eye contact for the first time. Ryan set down his clipboard and leaned against the examination table, abandoning the pretense of a routine checkup. Private Rivera, he said quietly, I've treated enough operators to recognize one when I see one. Your muscle development, reaction patterns, and pain response are inconsistent with your official MOS. Your medical records show evidence of multiple bone fractures that have healed cleanly, the kind of injuries associated with advanced close-quarters combat training. Emma's face remained impassive, but internally she was calculating risks and options. Her training had prepared her for many contingencies, but not for being identified by a perceptive Navy medic. I think we understand each other, Chief Blackwood, she said carefully. My medical information is compartmentalized for a reason. Ryan nodded slowly. I have clearance for classified medical treatment. Whatever program you're with, I can provide better care if I know what I'm dealing with. Your real injuries, not just what's in the official file. For several moments, Emma weighed her options. Her training officer had stressed repeatedly that operational security was paramount, revealing her true role to anyone not directly involved in the program could compromise years of careful preparation. But her injury was genuinely compromising her effectiveness, and proper treatment required specialized knowledge that few medical personnel possessed. Before she could decide, Ryan asked a question that changed everything. Where did you learn to tie a Prusik knot with your non-dominant hand while under stress? Emma froze completely. The Prusik knot was an advanced climbing technique used primarily by special forces for emergency rope work. More importantly, the specific variation Ryan referenced was taught only in classified training programs that officially didn't exist. There was no way a logistics specialist would know how to perform it, let alone execute it reflexively during a crisis. Ryan watched her reaction carefully. That wasn't in your file, he explained, but the callus patterns on your hands tell the story for anyone who knows what to look for. Those aren't the hands of someone who manages inventory. Emma made a decision. I can't discuss my training background, she said carefully, but your observation skills are very sharp for a medic. It wasn't a full confession, but it was acknowledgement enough. Ryan nodded, understanding the delicate position Emma found herself in. I should mention that your current injury pattern is consistent with a specific type of training accident I've seen before, he said. If you ever need to discuss the real circumstances for medical reasons, I have the security clearance to handle sensitive information. Emma's eyes widened slightly. Ryan wasn't just telling her he suspected her background. He was informing her that he had the proper clearances to discuss classified matters. The repelling accident involved equipment that isn't in my standard gear list, Emma admitted cautiously. There may be complications from my injuries that I haven't been able to discuss with other medical personnel. Ryan glanced at his watch. I think we should continue this conversation in a more secure environment. I have access to a skiff on base where we can discuss your medical situation without concerns about security protocols. A skiff-sensitive compartmented information facility was a specially constructed room designed to prevent electronic surveillance and unauthorized access. The fact that Ryan had access to such facilities confirmed Emma's growing suspicion that he was much more than just a regular Navy medic. Tomorrow, 0800, Ryan said, writing something on a prescription pad. This is officially for physical therapy consultation. Emma took the paper, recognizing the location code embedded in the seemingly routine medical instructions. As she prepared to leave, Ryan added one final comment that sent a chill down her spine. Be careful, Private. Someone's been accessing your medical files repeatedly in the past 48 hours. Someone with high-level clearance who isn't in your chain of command. Naval Special Warfare Command Coronado, 5 years earlier. Ryan Blackwood stood at attention on the burning hot asphalt, his body pushed beyond exhaustion, his mind focused on a single goal: not quitting. Around him, fellow SEAL candidates dropped out one by one, ringing the bell that signified surrender. The infamous Hell Week was living up to its reputation, testing each candidate's physical and mental limits. You think this is pain, the instructor shouted in his face. This isn't pain, this is just the beginning. When you're in a firefight with shrapnel in your gut and your teammate bleeding out beside you, that's pain, and you'll need to function through it. Ryan didn't flinch. He had joined the Navy with a single purpose: to become the kind of man who could make a difference in the world's most dangerous places. His father, a Vietnam veteran who had served as a medic in the jungle, had instilled in him both a desire to serve and a calling to heal. Budget's training was designed to identify those who would break under pressure, to weed out those who lacked the mental fortitude required for special operations. The physical challenges were brutal, but they were merely vehicles to test psychological resilience. Endless push-ups in freezing surf, miles of running with inflatable boats held overhead, sleep deprivation that made minutes feel like hours and hours feel like days. Out of an initial class of 147 candidates, only 32 completed the training. Ryan was one of them, standing tall at graduation, receiving the SEAL Trident that marked him as a member of America's most elite maritime special operations force. But Ryan had taken his training a step further, specializing in combat medicine. While all SEALs received medical training far beyond standard first aid, Ryan pursued advanced certification learning, surgical techniques typically reserved for trauma surgeons. He could perform emergency procedures in environments where conventional medical care was impossible, skills that had saved countless lives during his deployments. His first tour in Afghanistan had been an education in the realities of combat medicine, treating gunshot wounds under fire, stabilizing blast injuries with limited supplies, making life or death decisions in seconds. By his third deployment, Ryan had earned a reputation as one of the most skilled combat medics in special operations. But it was his deployment to Syria that changed everything. The mission had been classified at the highest levels, a covert operation to capture a high-value target associated with ISIS. The intelligence had seemed solid, the plan meticulously developed. What they hadn't known was that they were walking into a trap. The explosion had torn through their position without warning. 3 teammates killed instantly. Ryan, thrown clear by the blast, had sustained shrapnel wounds to his left shoulder and back. Despite his injuries, he had crawled back into the burning building, dragging out 2 wounded SEALs before the structure collapsed. For his actions, he received his 3rd Purple Heart and a Silver Star. But medals couldn't erase the memory of the men he couldn't save or the questions about how their position had been compromised. During his recovery, Ryan had been temporarily assigned to Fort Bragg, officially to provide specialized medical training to Army personnel, unofficially to recover from both physical and psychological wounds, away from the high-pressure environment of naval special warfare. What no one had told him was that his assignment had another purpose: to identify potential security breaches in classified programs operating on the base. After the disaster in Syria, naval intelligence suspected information leaks within Joint Special Operations programs, and Ryan's unique combination of medical expertise and operational experience made him an ideal observer, which was how he found himself treating a supposed logistics specialist whose body told a different story than her personnel file. SCIF facility, Fort Bragg. The next morning, Emma arrived at the designated SCIF 15 minutes early, following protocols ingrained through years of training. The facility was housed in a nondescript building near the center of the base, its exterior giving no indication of the sophisticated security measures within. After passing through multiple security checkpoints, each requiring different authentication methods, she was escorted to a small conference room. The space was sterile and windowless, equipped with white noise generators and signal-blocking technology that created an environment where sensitive conversations could take place safely. Ryan was already there, reviewing what appeared to be medical texts and classified technical manuals. He looked up when she entered, nodding toward a chair across from him. "The room is secure," he said without preamble. "We can speak freely here." Emma settled into the chair, her posture revealing nothing of her thoughts. "Before we begin, I need to know exactly who you are and what your clearance level is." Ryan smiled slightly. "Direct approach. I appreciate that." He slid an identification card across the table. It wasn't a standard military ID, but a specialized access card issued only to personnel involved in classified Joint Special Operations programs. "I'm part of a medical intelligence unit under JSOC," he explained, referring to the Joint Special Operations Command that oversaw the military's most secretive units. "My role involves providing specialized medical support to operators while also assessing security protocols within joint programs." Emma studied the ID carefully before returning it. "You're a security assessment officer," she stated flatly. "Among other things," Ryan acknowledged, "my primary function is medical, but after what happened in Syria, I was tasked with identifying potential vulnerabilities in our compartmentalized programs." Emma's eyes narrowed. "What happened in Syria?" "Mission compromise. 3 dead, 4 wounded." Ryan's voice remained professional, but Emma could see the flash of pain in his eyes. Intelligence failure or information leak, we still don't know. He leaned forward slightly. Which brings us to you, Private Rivera. Your official file says you're a logistics specialist with the 82nd Airborne. Your body says you're something else entirely. For a moment, Emma remained silent, calculating the risks of disclosure against the potential benefits of proper medical treatment. Finally, she made her decision. I'm part of a DIA program that officially doesn't exist, she said, referring to the Defense Intelligence Agency. We maintain our original military occupational specialties as cover while conducting operations that require complete deniability. Ryan nodded unsurprised. Ghost Protocol, he said quietly. Emma couldn't hide her shock. How do you know that name? Because Naval Intelligence has been tracking his activities for the past 18 months, Ryan replied. Not the operations themselves, those remain compartmentalized, but the program's existence and general methodology are known at certain levels. He pulled a medical imaging file from his stack of documents. Now about your actual injuries. The x-rays show the broken ribs and shoulder dislocation, but they don't explain the intermittent numbness you're experiencing in your left hand, do you? Emma blinked in surprise. She hadn't mentioned that symptom to anyone. I noticed it during your examination yesterday, Ryan explained. The way you unconsciously flexed your fingers when I tested your grip strength. Classic sign of nerve impingement. I was carrying specialized communication equipment during the rappelling exercise, Emma admitted. When the rope failed, the equipment was driven into my ribs. The official medical report couldn't include that detail. Ryan nodded, making notes in a separate file. The equipment likely compressed the brachial plexus during impact. That would explain the neurological symptoms. For the next hour, Ryan conducted a thorough examination focusing on symptoms that couldn't be documented in her official medical records. His knowledge of both combat injuries and specialized equipment was impressive, allowing Emma to explain her condition in technical detail without compromising operational security. As the session progressed, Ryan revealed more about his own background. He had served with Task Force Blue, a highly classified SEAL unit that conducted operations requiring complete deniability. His medical training included treating operatives from various intelligence agencies and special operations commands. The injury in Syria, Emma said as Ryan examined her shoulder. You mentioned a mission compromise. Do you think it was deliberate? Ryan's hands paused momentarily. 3 teams hit in 2 months, all operating under different commands, different mission parameters. The only commonality was the level of classification. Someone with high-level access, Emma concluded. That's the working theory, Ryan confirmed, resuming his examination, which is why Naval Intelligence is paying attention to programs like yours, not because they suspect you, but because they're looking for patterns of compromise. Emma processed this information carefully. And my medical files being accessed. That's what concerns me, Ryan said, his voice lowering despite the secure environment. Whoever is looking at your files has the clearance to do so, but according to my sources, they're not part of your program's oversight structure. Could be routine security audit, Emma suggested. Could be, Ryan agreed, but combined with other irregularities I've observed since arriving at Fort Bragg, I'm not convinced it's routine anything. He completed his examination and sat back organizing his notes. I can treat the nerve impingement with specialized therapy techniques developed for special operations personnel. We'll document it using medical codes that won't reveal the true nature of your injuries. Thank you, Emma said, genuinely grateful for both the treatment and the discretion. There's something else you should know. Ryan added, his expression turning serious. There's been increased scrutiny of all special access programs following a congressional inquiry into intelligence failures in the Middle East. Programs without formal charters like Ghost Protocol are particularly vulnerable. Mahdi, Emma felt a chill at his words. Ghost Protocol existed in the shadows of the military bureaucracy, operating under authorities granted through classified executive orders rather than formal military structures. If those authorities were questioned or revoked the program, and everyone in it would be exposed. Who's leading the inquiry, she asked. Officially, the Senate Intelligence Committee. Unofficially, most of the pressure is coming from Colonel Alexander Russell, Director of Counterintelligence Operations at the Pentagon. Emma had never heard the name, but something about it triggered her professional instincts. What's his background? Cold War-era NSA operative specialized in counterintelligence against Soviet bloc countries, Ryan replied. transitioned to military intelligence after the fall of the Berlin Wall. He's old school, believes in centralized control of all intelligence assets, and he'd view programs like Ghost Protocol as dangerous anomalies. Emma concluded, precisely. Ryan gathered his materials, preparing to end their session. I've scheduled follow-up appointments for your physical therapy. Officially, you're receiving standard post-operative care. Unofficially, we'll be treating the nerve damage using techniques not available in conventional military medicine. As they prepared to leave the skiff, Ryan made one final observation that would prove prophetic. In all my years treating special operations personnel, I've never met someone who carries the weight of secrecy as heavily as you do, he said quietly. That level of compartmentalization might be necessary for your mission, but it's not healthy for long-term psychological well-being. Emma was taken aback by his observation. Throughout her training and operational career, she had been praised for her ability to maintain perfect operational security, never once breaking character or revealing classified information. The idea that this strength might also be a weakness had never occurred to her. We all have our burdens to carry, she replied simply. Ryan held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. True, but carrying them alone isn't always the strongest approach. As Emma left the skiff moving through the security checkpoints with practiced ease, she found herself thinking about Ryan's words. For 3 years, she had lived a carefully constructed lie, maintaining her cover identity with perfect discipline. The weight of that deception had become so familiar, she hardly noticed it anymore, until someone had seen through it with unexpected clarity. What she couldn't know then was that their conversation in the skiff had already set in motion events that would test both her training and her identity in ways she could never have anticipated. Someone had been monitoring the security logs for the facility, noting the unusual meeting between a Navy SEAL medic and an Army logistics specialist. Colonel Alexander Russell sat in his Pentagon office reviewing those same logs with growing interest. 3 years of carefully tracking suspected Ghost Protocol operatives had yielded little concrete evidence until now. A medic with access to classified information and a logistics specialist with unexplained security clearances meeting in a skiff outside their normal operational parameters. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to justify increased surveillance. Russell typed a brief command into his secure terminal authorizing expanded monitoring of both Petty Officer Ryan Blackwood and Private Emma Rivera. I think we found our way in, he murmured to himself, a thin smile spreading across his face. After decades in counterintelligence, Russell knew that even the most disciplined operatives had vulnerabilities. Sometimes those vulnerabilities were physical, sometimes psychological, but most often they were personal. The trap was baited. Now all he had to do was wait for them to make a mistake. Emma's quarters, Fort Bragg, that night, Emma sat on the edge of her bed, methodically cleaning and maintaining her standard-issue M9 pistol, a routine task that helped her think. The small barracks room was Spartan, but meticulously organized, revealing nothing about its occupant beyond military precision. Her meeting with Ryan had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Not because he had identified her as something other than a logistics specialist. That risk was always present, but because of how he had done it. Not through surveillance or intelligence gathering, but through simple observation and medical knowledge. If one perceptive medic could see through her cover so easily, who else might be watching? More concerning was the information about her medical files being accessed repeatedly. Within Ghost Protocol, information was compartmentalized to an extreme degree. Only her direct handler, Colonel Victoria Morgan, should have been reviewing her records with any regularity. Emma reassembled the pistol with practiced movements, her mind working through potential scenarios. It could be routine security monitoring, as she had suggested to Ryan. It could be increased scrutiny following her injury. Or it could be something more concerning, targeted surveillance by someone like Colonel Russell. She had never heard of Russell before today, but his profile matched a certain type she had encountered in intelligence circles career officers who viewed newer, more autonomous intelligence programs as threats to established power structures. Men who had built their careers in a world of rigid hierarchies and clear enemy states, struggling to adapt to the fluid threats of modern conflict. Emma secured the pistol in its lockbox and moved to the window, scanning the darkened parade ground outside with habitual caution. 3 years of covert operations had honed her situational awareness to near paranoid levels. Her training had prepared her for many contingencies: surveillance detection, counterinterrogation techniques, cover identity maintenance. But it hadn't prepared her for a connection with someone who could see past her carefully constructed facade, someone who understood both her mission and the burden it placed on her. The realization troubled her. In the world of Ghost Protocol, connections were vulnerabilities. Attachments created weaknesses that could be exploited. Every operative was trained to remain emotionally detached, professionally focused, and absolutely independent. Yet something about Ryan Blackwood had pierced that training. Perhaps it was their shared experience of living double lives, of carrying secrets that couldn't be shared. Perhaps it was simply his direct approach cutting through years of misdirection and hidden truths. Whatever the reason, Emma found herself thinking about their next meeting with an anticipation that had nothing to do with medical treatment and everything to do with the possibility of honest connection, a luxury she hadn't experienced in years. She would need to be careful, very careful, because if her suspicions about Colonel Russell were correct, he would be looking for exactly this kind of vulnerability to exploit. Emma moved away from the window and began her nightly security routine, checking the room for any signs of intrusion or surveillance. As she ran her fingers along the doorframe, she discovered something that made her blood run cold. A nearly invisible filament stretched across the upper corner, a primitive but effective alarm that would alert an observer if the door was open. Someone had been in her room while she was at the skiff. Someone professional enough to leave almost no trace, but either rushed or overconfident enough to make this small mistake. The game had changed. She was no longer just an operative maintaining cover. She was now a target under active surveillance. Emma carefully replaced the filament exactly as she had found it. Whoever was watching needed to believe their surveillance remained undetected. She completed her security check as if nothing were amiss, then prepared for bed according to her normal routine. But sleep would not come easily tonight. Not with the knowledge that unknown eyes were watching, waiting for her to make a mistake. Tomorrow's meeting with Ryan had just become significantly more complicated and potentially dangerous. What neither Emma nor Ryan could know was that their paths crossing was not the random coincidence it appeared to be. Their meeting had been orchestrated months in advance by forces working within the shadows of military intelligence forces, with agendas that would soon draw them both into a conspiracy reaching back to the Cold War. The silent wounded woman and the SEAL medic had unwittingly become pieces in a game where the stakes included not just their careers or their lives, but potentially the security of operations spanning 3 continents. And somewhere in the darkness, Colonel Alexander Russell smiled as the first pieces of his plan fell into place. The morning light filtered through the blinds of the skiff as Emma entered for her second meeting with Ryan. Unlike their first encounter today, she moved with heightened vigilance, scanning the room with practiced subtlety for signs of surveillance or tampering. "Something wrong?" Ryan asked, noting the almost imperceptible changes in her demeanor. Emma took her seat positioned to face both Ryan and the door. "Someone was in my quarters yesterday. Professional job, minimal traces, but they left a filament trap on the doorframe." Ryan's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened with concern. "Random security check or targeted surveillance?" "After our meeting yesterday, I don't believe in coincidences of that magnitude." Emma kept her voice low despite the skiff's security measures. Years in covert operations had taught her that no system was completely impenetrable. "Neither do I." Ryan pushed a small notebook across the table. Inside was a hand-drawn diagram of the skiff and surrounding corridors with a small X marked near the eastern exit. "After you left yesterday, I conducted a routine security sweep, found a micro-transmitter in the corridor outside. Military-grade NSA design pattern." Emma studied the diagram, her mind calculating implications. Someone's monitoring who enters and exits the skiff, not what's said inside. Exactly. They're mapping connections, not content. The realization hung between them. Someone with significant resources and high-level access was tracking their interactions, building a network analysis that could potentially expose Ghost Protocol operatives and their support infrastructure. "You mentioned Colonel Russell yesterday," Emma said carefully. "Would he have the authority to place surveillance devices on a secure military installation?" Ryan's jaw tightened. "Officially, no, but counterintelligence has certain operational flexibilities when investigating potential security breaches." Emma processed this information with the cool detachment her training had instilled. "Then we need to assume we're being watched both individually and as a connection point." "Agreed." Ryan pulled out her medical file, transitioning smoothly to their cover story. "Let's begin your treatment, Private Rivera." Your physical therapy will focus on restoring mobility to your shoulder while addressing the nerve impingement. For the next 45 minutes, they maintain the appearance of a routine medical session. Ryan demonstrated specialized therapeutic techniques designed to address Emma's unique injuries, techniques developed specifically for special operations personnel who needed to recover quickly and without conventional medical support. As his hands worked on her injured shoulder, Emma noted the precision of his movements, each touch deliberate, professional, yet conveying an understanding of the body that went beyond standard medical training. His fingers found pressure points and nerve pathways with uncanny accuracy, bringing immediate relief to areas that had been troubling her for weeks. "Where did you learn these techniques?" she asked, genuinely curious. "This isn't standard Navy medicine." A shadow crossed Ryan's face. "Afghanistan 2011. Our unit was pinned down in the Hindu Kush for 3 weeks, cut off from support. Had 6 wounded men and dwindling supplies. Necessity became the mother of invention." Emma heard what he didn't say. The desperation, the responsibility of keeping men alive when conventional methods failed, the improvisation under extreme pressure. She recognized the look in his eyes, the same haunted focus she had seen in her father's gaze when memories of desert storms surfaced through the alcohol. The techniques were refined later. Ryan continued, redirecting the conversation away from memories that still carried their sting. JSOC established a specialized medical program for operators who couldn't access conventional treatment due to mission classifications or remote deployments. As he worked, Ryan subtly guided the conversation toward Emma's operational background, asking questions that seemed medically relevant but were clearly designed to build a more complete picture of her training and capabilities. Emma provided carefully measured responses, revealing enough to justify her unusual physical condition without compromising operational security. "Your recovery is progressing well," Ryan said as they concluded the session, "but there's still significant nerve impingement affecting your left hand. I'm recommending daily therapy sessions for the next 2 weeks." The implication was clear: they needed regular contact to exchange information about the developing situation with Russell's surveillance. Emma nodded her understanding. "Before you go," Ryan added, his voice dropping slightly, "there's something you should know. Yesterday I received orders for deployment to CENTCOM in 3 weeks, standard rotation for SEAL medical personnel." Emma felt an unexpected tightness in her chest at this news. Their professional relationship had barely begun yet. The prospect of its premature end left her strangely unsettled. "Standard rotation," she repeated, keeping her voice neutral. "Convenient timing." Ryan's eyes met hers with silent acknowledgement. The orders were almost certainly intended to separate them, to break whatever connection Russell believed they were forming. "I'll see you tomorrow, 0900, Ryan said, returning to his professional demeanor. "Ice that shoulder tonight, 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off." As Emma left the skiff, carefully navigating the corridors to avoid predictable movement patterns, she reflected on the rapidly evolving situation. What had begun as a simple medical issue had transformed into something far more complex and potentially dangerous. Office of Colonel Alexander Russell, Pentagon, that same day. Colonel Alexander Russell studied the surveillance reports with methodical precision, his weathered hands arranging the documents in neat rows across his desk. After 40 years in intelligence work, first with the NSA during the Cold War, and later with military counterintelligence, Russell had developed an instinct for patterns, the subtle connections and anomalies that revealed covert operations. Ghost Protocol had been a thorn in his side for years, a program operating outside traditional command structures, answering to authorities Russell couldn't access or influence. Its very existence represented everything he despised about modern intelligence operations: decentralized, autonomous, resistant to oversight. "Sir, the latest movement logs from Fort Bragg," his aide said, placing another file on the desk. "Blackwood and Rivera met again this morning. 47 minutes in the skiff." Russell nodded without looking up. "And the transmitter?" "Still operational. We've confirmed Blackwood found the decoy device in the eastern corridor, but hasn't located the secondary units." A thin smile crossed Russell's face. Classic misdirection let them find one surveillance device to create the illusion of security while maintaining the actual monitoring network. It was an old KGB tactic he had studied during his NSA days, one that remained effective despite advances in counter-surveillance technology. "What about their backgrounds?" Russell asked, opening another file. "Blackwood's record is consistent with his cover story. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Syria. Multiple decorations including 3 Purple Hearts and a Silver Star. His medical specialization appears legitimate. And Rivera? That's where it gets interesting, sir. The aide handed him a separate folder marked with a red security stripe. Her official record shows a standard career track, basic training, AIT, for logistics assignment to the 82nd Airborne. Exemplary but unremarkable service. But, Russell prompted, hearing the hesitation in his aide's voice, but there are anomalies. Unexplained absences disguised as training and rotations, qualification certifications that don't match her MOS requirements, physical evaluation scores well above the norm for logistics personnel. Russell studied the personnel file carefully, noting the discrepancies his aide had highlighted. To most observers, Emma Rivera appeared to be an exceptional but otherwise normal Army logistics specialist. But to someone with Russell's experience, the inconsistencies painted a different picture, one of a covert operative using a military position as cover. What about their personal backgrounds? Any connections before Fort Bragg? None that we found, sir. Blackwood grew up in California, career military family. Rivera, from small-town Texas father, was a Desert Storm veteran with alcohol issues. Mother worked as a school administrator. No overlapping assignments, no common acquaintances we can identify. Russell leaned back in his chair, considering the information. So we have a SEAL medic with an unusually high security clearance meeting regularly with an Army logistics specialist who exhibits training inconsistent with her official role. Both individuals operating at Fort Bragg during a period when we've tracked increased Ghost Protocol activity in the region. That's the assessment, sir. Increase surveillance on both targets, Russell ordered. I want everything: movement, patterns, communications, personal habits. And get me authorization for electronic monitoring of their quarters. The aide hesitated. Sir, that would require general staff approval for domestic surveillance of military personnel. Russell's eyes hardened. Then get the approval. Frame it as a counter-espionage investigation. Use the Syria compromise as justification, suggest we have evidence of continued information leakage. Yes, sir. The aide collected the files and moved toward the door. One more thing, Russell called after him. Accelerate Blackwood's deployment orders. I want him out of Fort Bragg within 2 weeks, not 3. As the door closed, Russell turned to the window overlooking the Pentagon courtyard. Below, military personnel moved with purpose through their daily routines, each following their assigned role in the vast machinery of American defense. Order, structure, hierarchy. These were the principles Russell had devoted his life to protecting. Ghost Protocol and programs like it represented a dangerous deviation. Operatives with too much autonomy, too little oversight, too great a potential for compromise. In Russell's world, shaped by decades of Cold War operations, unauthorized connections were vulnerabilities waiting to be exploited. The relationship developing between Blackwood and Rivera represented exactly the kind of security breach he had spent his career preventing. Whatever they were planning, whatever information they were exchanging, he would uncover it. And when he did, he would finally have the leverage needed to bring Ghost Protocol under proper control. His control. Emma's physical therapy session to Fort Bragg 2 days later. Extend your arms slowly, Ryan instructed, supporting Emma's elbow as she worked through the therapeutic movement. Feel the resistance point. Emma nodded, focusing on the subtle sensations in her recovering muscles. 3 days of specialized treatment had already yielded significant improvement in her range of motion, though the nerve impingement continued to cause intermittent numbness in her fingers. They were working in a standard physical therapy room, rather than the SCIF today, a calculated risk that allowed them to establish a more visible public pattern of interaction while reserving the secure facility for truly sensitive conversations. Hold at the resistance point, Ryan continued, his voice carrying the practiced calm of an experienced medical professional. Now breathe through it, visualizing the muscle fibers extending gradually. As Emma followed his instructions, she maintained peripheral awareness of their surroundings. 2 other patients worked with different therapists across the room. A military police officer conducted a routine patrol past the exterior windows. Security cameras mounted in the corners provided standard monitoring of the medical facility. Everything appeared normal, yet Emma's instincts, honed through years of covert operations, detected subtle irregularities. The MP patrol had passed the windows 3 times in 30 minutes, more frequent than standard security protocols dictated. One of the patients across the room held himself with the controlled posture of someone with tactical training despite his civilian appearance. Ryan had noticed too. His movements remained smooth and professional, but his positioning had subtly shifted to maintain sight lines to both the door and the suspicious patient. "You're making excellent progress," he said loud enough to be heard clearly by anyone monitoring the room. "The muscle tissue is responding well to treatment. Another week and we should see significant improvement in nerve function." The coded message was clear. They had approximately 1 week before Ryan's accelerated deployment would separate them, potentially cutting off their information exchange permanently. "That's good to hear," Emma replied, matching his professional tone. "I'm eager to return to full duty." As Ryan guided her through the next set of exercises, he maintained the appearance of routine treatment while employing subtle hand pressure to communicate what couldn't be spoken aloud. 3 quick taps on her shoulder blade surveillance confirmed. 2 slow pressures near her spine, secure meeting needed. Emma acknowledged with an equally subtle response, adjusting her position in a way that would appear natural to observers, but confirmed her understanding to Ryan. "Let's finish with electrical stimulation therapy," Ryan suggested, moving toward a treatment station equipped with monitoring equipment. The machines would provide both legitimate therapy for Emma's nerve damage and cover noise for brief whispered communication. As he attached the electrodes to her shoulder, Ryan leaned close under the pretense of adjusting the equipment settings. "Russell's accelerated my deployment," he murmured, his lips barely moving. "Orders came through this morning. Shipping out in 9 days." Emma maintained her neutral expression despite the surge of concern this news triggered. 9 days was barely enough time to understand what they were facing, let alone develop countermeasures. "Zeskiv compromised," she whispered in response. Meeting there would confirm their suspicions. Ryan nodded imperceptibly, adjusting another electrode. "Alternative secure location needed." Emma's mind raced through possibilities. Standard meeting protocols were compromised if Russell had indeed infiltrated base security systems. Off-base locations carried different risks, potentially exposing their movements to additional surveillance. They needed a location that offered both security and plausible deniability. "Repelling training ground," she suggested, the words barely audible beneath the hum of the electrical stimulation machine. "Tomorrow 0500, maintenance inspection, cover." The location was perfect, the same training area where her accident had occurred, now restricted for safety evaluation. As logistics personnel, Emma had legitimate access for equipment inventory purposes. As a medical officer assessing training injuries, Ryan could justify his presence without raising alarms. "Confirmed," Ryan whispered, then raised his voice to normal levels. "How does that feel?" "The current should be noticeable, but not painful." "It's fine," Emma replied seamlessly, transitioning back to their cover interaction. "I can feel the stimulation along the nerve pathway." The therapy session continued for another 20 minutes, concluding with Ryan providing Emma with printed exercise instructions for home care papers that contained no hidden messages or codes, as such obvious tradecraft would only confirm suspicions. As Emma left the medical facility, she maintained awareness of her surroundings without betraying her training. The patient with tactical posture was now walking 20 meters behind her, maintaining consistent distance, amateur surveillance technique that might as well have come with flashing warning lights. Rather than evade the tail, which would only confirm suspicions about her training, Emma followed a predictable path back to her quarters, stopping at the mess hall for a meal and then at the base exchange for toiletries, normal activities that reinforced her cover identity. Only when she reached her quarters did she allow herself to consider the full implications of their situation. Russell was moving faster than anticipated, accelerating Ryan's deployment to cut off their connection. The question was, why? What made their interaction so threatening that it warranted this level of response? The answer had to lie in whatever Russell believed they knew or were sharing. Something valuable enough or dangerous enough to justify risking exposure of his own surveillance operation. Emma began preparing for the next day's meeting, mentally reviewing what she knew about the repelling training ground access points, security measures, potential observation positions. If Russell's people were watching, as they almost certainly would be, she and Ryan would have one chance to exchange critical information without detection. As she methodically checked her gear, Emma acknowledged an uncomfortable truth. Her interest in this situation had evolved beyond professional necessity. Something about Ryan Blackwood, his perception, his calm under pressure, his understanding of the burden she carried, had created a connection she hadn't experienced since joining Ghost Protocol. For someone trained to operate alone to trust no one outside the program, such a connection represented both a potential vulnerability and an unexpected source of strength. Tomorrow would determine which it would prove to be. Rappelling training ground, Fort Bragg, show 500 hours. Dawn was still an hour away when Emma arrived at the training ground, the landscape illuminated only by the faint glow of security lights in the distance. The air carried the chill of early morning, heavy with dew, and the scent of pine from the surrounding forest. The training area consisted of a 70-foot artificial cliff face used for rappelling exercises surrounded by a cleared perimeter for safety and observation. Since Emma's accident, the area had been restricted pending safety evaluation, with access limited to maintenance personnel and safety inspectors. Emma approached from the eastern maintenance path using her logistics credentials to pass the minimal security checkpoint. Her clipboard and inspection forms provided perfect cover for her pre-dawn presence inventory assessment before the day's scheduled maintenance work. She moved methodically around the training area, appearing to check equipment and make notes while actually conducting a thorough security sweep. No obvious surveillance, though. 3 positions in the surrounding tree line offered potential observation points. The area itself seemed clear of electronic monitoring, the safety investigation having removed standard training cameras until the review was complete. Ryan arrived 20 minutes later, approaching from the north. His medical kit and injury assessment forms established his cover, following up on training injuries to improve safety protocols. His movements were casual yet precise, his attention apparently focused on the cliff face while actually scanning for the same surveillance risks Emma had identified. They met at the base of the cliff, positioning themselves so the bulk of the structure blocked line of sight from the most likely observation points. "Good morning, Private," Ryan said, at normal volume, establishing their cover interaction. "I'm reviewing the safety conditions where your accident occurred. Could you show me exactly where the rope failed?" "Yes, sir," Emma replied, pointing toward a section of the cliff face. "I was approximately 20 feet up using the eastern anchor point." As they moved toward the indicated position, Ryan spoke quietly, his voice barely audible. "Russell's pulled my deployment orders forward again. 5 days now, not 9. Emma felt a spike of alarm but kept her expression neutral. "Escalation? Why, bae? He's convinced we're exchanging classified information, specifically information about a security compromise in Syria." They reached the eastern anchor point, and Emma made a show of examining the bolt fixtures while they continued their whispered conversation. "The mission where you were injured?" she asked. Ryan nodded slightly. 3 teammates killed, 4 wounded. Official reports cited intelligence failure, but there were inconsistencies that were never addressed. "You think it was deliberate?" "I think someone with high-level clearance provided information that compromised our position." Ryan adjusted a piece of equipment maintaining their cover activity. "And I think Russell is concerned that I've identified who." Emma processed this information quickly. "But you haven't, have you?" "No, but my assignment to Fort Bragg included a secondary objective identifying potential security breaches within Joint Special Operations programs. Russell knows this. And then you connected with me someone he's already flagged as a Ghost Protocol operative." "Exactly. From his perspective, it looks like I've identified you as a security risk and am either investigating or recruiting you." Emma considered the implications. "So he's accelerating your deployment to break our connection before we can exchange whatever information he thinks we have, while simultaneously gathering evidence against both of us." Ryan moved to examine another section of the training area, ensuring their conversation couldn't be overheard by anyone potentially watching from the tree line. "The question is, why is Russell so invested in Ghost Protocol? What about the program threatens him personally?" Emma had been asking herself the same question. Russell's actions suggested more than professional concern about security protocols. His aggressive surveillance and rapid response to their connection indicated personal stakes in the outcome. "Ghost Protocol operates outside traditional intelligence hierarchies," she said thoughtfully. "Reports directly to Joint Special Operations Command rather than through conventional channels." "Meaning Russell has no visibility or control over its operations?" Ryan concluded. "But that alone wouldn't justify this level of response. Unless," Emma paused, an unsettling theory forming in her mind, "unless Ghost Protocol is investigating something that threatens Russell directly." Ryan's eyes sharpened with interest. such as, "I don't know specifically. My operations have focused on domestic security vulnerabilities, infrastructure protection, counterterrorism." Emma hesitated, weighing operational security against their current situation. But there's been increasing emphasis on identifying foreign intelligence assets within U.S. military command structures. Russian assets. Ryan asked, the connection to Russell's Cold War background immediately apparent. Among others, Emma confirmed, the program was established after several security breaches suggested long-term penetration of military intelligence. Ryan was silent for a moment, processing the implications. If Russell served in counterintelligence during the Cold War, he would have had direct contact with Soviet intelligence officers. Perfect position for recruitment. A lot of assumptions, Emma cautioned, but it would explain his fixation on Ghost Protocol and his determination to separate us before we can share information. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of an approaching vehicle. Both immediately resumed their cover activities, Ryan examining the safety equipment while Emma made notes on her clipboard. A military police jeep pulled up at the perimeter of the training area, 2 MPs inside. Standard patrol or Russell's surveillance, impossible to determine with certainty. "We should wrap this up," Ryan said at normal volume. "I have enough information for my safety assessment." Emma nodded, gathering her inspection materials. "The maintenance team will be arriving soon to begin repairs." As they walked back toward the access road, maintaining professional distance, appropriate for their respective roles, Ryan spoke one last time in a near whisper. "Tomorrow, 1100 hours, base chapel. Weekly meditation session for deployed personnel. Minimal security, no electronic monitoring allowed out of respect for religious privacy." "Confirmed," Emma replied softly, then raised her voice to normal levels. "Thank you for your thoroughness, sir. The safety improvements will benefit all training personnel." They parted ways at the access road, each departing in different directions to maintain the appearance of a concluded professional interaction. As Emma walked back toward the main base facilities, she considered their developing theory about Russell. If a senior counterintelligence officer was indeed compromised, potentially a decades-long foreign asset, the implications were staggering. Such a person would have access to sensitive operations across multiple theaters, the ability to compromise missions selectively, and the authority to direct investigations away from themselves. The Syria mission that had injured Ryan and killed his teammates could be just one of many operations Russell had undermined over the years. But theories weren't evidence, and without proof, any move against someone of Russell's rank and connection would be not just futile, but potentially fatal to their careers and to Ghost Protocol itself. They needed more information, specifics about Russell's activities, documentation of suspicious patterns, communications with foreign contacts, all before Ryan's accelerated deployment cut off their partnership permanently. 5 days, the countdown had begun. Base Chapel, Fort Bragg, 1100 hours the next day. The Fort Bragg Chapel stood as an oasis of calm amid the constant activity of the military base. Built in the 1960s, its simple architecture reflected the utilitarian aesthetics of its era, yet its purpose as a place of reflection and spiritual comfort remained timeless. Emma entered through the main doors, nodding respectfully to the chaplain, who greeted visitors in the small foyer. She had dressed in standard PT uniform, appropriate for someone attending the meditation session between regular duties. "First time?" the chaplain asked kindly. "Yes, sir," Emma replied with the hesitant politeness of someone unused to chapel attendance. "My physical therapist recommended meditation for pain management." "You'll find it helpful, I think," the chaplain said, gesturing toward the main chapel area. "The session is just getting started. Find any seat that's comfortable." Emma thanked him and moved into the chapel proper, where about 15 service members sat scattered throughout the pews. The meditation session was a regular offering for personnel dealing with the deployment, stress PTSD, or physical recovery, a legitimate reason for her presence that required no elaborate cover story. Ryan was already seated in a pew near the back, dressed in his Navy uniform, a Bible open on his lap for appearance's sake. Emma took a seat 2 rows behind him, maintaining enough distance to avoid the appearance of deliberate connection while still allowing quiet communication once the meditation began. A civilian instructor in simple clothing stood at the front, guiding the group through preliminary breathing exercises. The chapel's design included no security cameras out of respect for religious privacy, and electronic devices were requested to be turned off during sessions, creating the secure environment Ryan had promised. When the instructor dimmed the lights and asked everyone to close their eyes for the guided meditation, Emma shifted slightly in her seat, positioning herself where she could speak without being observed. Russell's people followed me to my quarters yesterday, she said, her voice barely a whisper beneath the instructor's calming intonations. They're getting more aggressive, less concerned about detection. Ryan didn't turn, maintaining the appearance of meditation. Same here. Two-man surveillance team, rotating shifts. They're building a case documenting every movement and interaction. For what purpose? What's the end game? Discrediting both of us, I suspect, painting me as a security risk and you as a rogue operative. Once I'm deployed, he'll likely move against you directly. Internal investigation, security review, possibly transfer to isolate you from your handler. Emma had considered the same possibility. Without Ryan as a witness or ally, she would be vulnerable to whatever narrative Russell constructed. I need to contact my handler, she said. Colonel Morgan needs to know what's happening. Too risky through normal channels, Ryan cautioned. If Russell has the surveillance authority, I suspect he's monitoring all your communications. Then we need to create a secure communication method before you deploy. The meditation instructor's voice rose slightly, guiding participants through visualization exercises. Several people shifted in their seats, some genuinely engaged in the meditation, others clearly struggling with the enforced stillness. There's something else you should know, Ryan continued, his voice dropping even lower. I received a classified intelligence brief yesterday, standard pre-deployment update. It included a mention of increased Russian intelligence activity targeting military medical research facilities. Emma's attention sharpened. What kind of research? Experimental combat trauma treatments, specifically nerve regeneration techniques developed for special operations personnel. The connection was immediate and concerning. The specialized treatment Ryan had been providing for Emma's nerve damage utilized exactly those techniques, classified medical procedures that few outside special operations medicine would recognize. Russell is using my injury as a tracking mechanism, Emma realized, monitoring who has the expertise to treat the specific damage, identifying ghost protocol medical support networks, and in the process potentially exposing operational details to Russian intelligence, Ryan added grimly. The meditation session continued around them, the instructor's soothing voice creating a bubble of calm that belied the tension of their whispered exchange. We need evidence, Emma said after a moment of contemplation. Documentation of Russell's communications, proof of his connection to foreign intelligence. Impossible to access through official channels. His communications would be protected by the highest security protocols. Then we need to force a mistake, create a situation where he reveals his connection or priorities. Ryan was silent for a moment, considering the implications. That's extremely high risk. If we're wrong about him, career suicide at minimum, Emma acknowledged. But if we're right and he is a foreign asset who's compromised operations and gotten your teammates killed, the unspoken conclusion hung between them. If Russell was indeed a long-term penetration agent, the damage to national security would be incalculable, justifying extraordinary measures to expose him. I might have a way to access historical communications, Ryan said finally. My clearance for the Syria investigation included limited access to archived intelligence from operations Russell oversaw. If there's a pattern of compromised missions, it might be documented there. How quickly can you review the files? 24 hours, maybe less, but I'll need a secure system that Russell's people aren't monitoring. Emma thought quickly, running through the secure facilities available on base. Most would have standard monitoring that Russell could access through his counterintelligence authority. The JSOC Auxiliary Command Center, she suggested. It's designed for compartmentalized operations with standalone systems isolated from main networks. Ryan nodded slightly, acknowledging the viable suggestion. I can get access through my SEAL team authentication. Tomorrow, 200 hours, minimal staff present. The meditation instructor began bringing the session to a close, guiding participants back to awareness of their surroundings. Emma and Ryan fell silent, returning their attention to the guided exercise to maintain their cover. As the lights came back up, participants began stirring, some quietly leaving, while others remained seated in continued reflection. Emma waited for several others to depart before standing and making her way toward the exit, careful not to acknowledge Ryan directly. Outside the chapel, Emma blinked in the bright midday sun, taking a moment to orient herself. As she started toward the administrative buildings where her official duties would provide cover for the remainder of the day, she noticed a familiar figure watching from across the parade ground. Colonel Victoria Morgan, her handler in Ghost Protocol, stood observing her from beside a staff car, her expression unreadable at this distance. The colonel's presence was unexpected. Official contact between them was strictly regulated to prevent pattern recognition that might expose their connection. Morgan's appearance now in the open observing Emma after a meeting with Ryan suggested the situation had escalated beyond their initial assessment. Either Morgan had identified the threat Russell posed independently, or more concerning, Russell had already moved against Ghost Protocol, officially forcing Morgan to break cover protocols. Either way, the countdown clock had just accelerated dramatically. Whatever evidence they hoped to find needed to be secured immediately before Russell could complete whatever operation he had set in motion. As Emma watched, Morgan turned and entered her staff car, pulling away without any acknowledgement or attempt at contact. The message was clear: Emma was on her own for now, operating without the program's direct support until the situation clarified. It was a position Emma had trained for, but had hoped never to face isolated under surveillance, with limited time to expose a threat that reached into the highest levels of military intelligence. And in 5 days, her only ally would be deployed thousands of miles away, leaving her to face Russell's operation alone, unless they could find the evidence they needed in the next 24 hours. JSOC Auxiliary Command Center, Fort Bragg, 0200 hours. The Joint Special Operations Command Auxiliary Facility operated continuously, but reached its lowest staffing levels between ERA 100 and 0400 hours, the optimal window for their unauthorized intelligence review. Ryan arrived first, using his SEAL team credentials and medical research authorization to gain access to the secure computer systems. The night duty officer, a young lieutenant who clearly recognized Ryan's SEAL insignia, accepted his explanation about reviewing medical intelligence for pre-deployment preparation without question. Special operations personnel often worked unusual hours, and the culture of the JSOC facility emphasized operational flexibility over rigid adherence to schedules. Emma arrived 30 minutes later, using her logistics specialist cover to explain her presence inventory assessment of specialized equipment storage that required secure terminal access. Her authorization codes provided through Ghost Protocol, but appearing as standard logistics credentials, gave her the necessary system access without raising suspicions. They worked at separate terminals, maintaining professional distance while conducting their respective investigations into Russell's activities. The command center's night skeleton crew paid them little attention, focused on monitoring ongoing operations in distant theaters. Ryan accessed the Syria operation files, first using his personal involvement to justify the records request. The official investigation had concluded that local intelligence failure had led to the team's position being compromised, but Ryan had always suspected there was more to the story. He began by cross-referencing intelligence briefings provided before the mission with actual conditions encountered on the ground. The discrepancies were subtle but significant: building layouts that didn't match intelligence images, guard rotations that appeared to have been changed just before the operation, defensive positions that seemed specifically designed to counter the team's planned approach. More telling was the chain of intelligence verification. The final operational briefing had included last-minute updates authorized by a senior intelligence officer, Colonel Alexander Russell, acting in his capacity as liaison between NSA intelligence gathering and special operations deployment. Russell had personally signed off on intelligence changes that sent Ryan's team into a trap. One instance could be explained as unfortunate error, but as Ryan expanded his search to other compromised operations over the past 5 years, a pattern emerged. Russell's involvement, either directly or through his subordinates, appeared in the intelligence chain of multiple operations that had gone wrong in remarkably similar ways. At her terminal, Emma was pursuing a different angle. Using her Ghost Protocol access protocols disguised as standard logistics queries, she examined Russell's personnel file and career progression. His official record was impressive: recruited to the NSA directly from university in 1982, specialized in Soviet counterintelligence during the Cold War, transitioned to military intelligence after the Berlin Wall fell, steady advancement through increasingly sensitive positions. But there were anomalies that her Ghost Protocol training helped her identify. unexplained gaps in deployment records, financial transactions that, while not explicitly suspicious, showed patterns inconsistent with his official postings. Most notably, his rapid advancement during periods when Soviet counterintelligence operations were yielding unexpectedly poor results. Emma expanded her search to include Russell's known associates and mentors, looking for connections that might reveal larger patterns. One name appeared repeatedly in his early career, Dr. Viktor Kaminsky, a Soviet defector who had provided valuable intelligence on KGB operations before being granted asylum and a consulting position with the NSA. Kaminsky had personally recommended Russell for his first counterintelligence assignment and had maintained contact with him throughout the 1980s. Subsequent records indicated Kaminsky had returned to Russia after the Soviet collapse, ostensibly to reconnect with family. But Ghost Protocol's intelligence database contained additional information about Kaminsky, not included in standard records, suspected double agent believed to have maintained KGB connections throughout his defection, potentially used to place long-term assets within American intelligence. The connection was circumstantial, but compelling. If Kaminsky had indeed been a double agent, his mentorship of Russell took on sinister implications. A Russian asset placed in American counterintelligence during the Cold War, maintained through the post-Soviet transition, now positioned to compromise special operations targeting Russian interests around the world. Emma and Ryan exchanged glances across the command center, each recognizing that the other had found significant information. They needed to compare findings, but the open environment of the command center made detailed discussion impossible. Ryan tilted his head slightly toward the door, indicating they should meet outside. Emma nodded almost imperceptibly, then returned to her terminal to complete her session without raising suspicion. 10 minutes later, they reconvened in a maintenance corridor adjacent to the command center, an area without surveillance cameras due to regular electromagnetic interference from nearby equipment. Russell authorized the intelligence updates that sent my team into an ambush in Syria, Ryan said without preamble, his voice tight with controlled anger. And it wasn't the only operation he compromised. I found 7 others over the past 5 years, all with similar patterns. He was mentored by a suspected Russian double agent early in his career, Emma added. Viktor Kaminsky, officially a Soviet defector, unofficially believed to have maintained KGB connections throughout his time with the NSA. Ryan absorbed this information, the pieces fitting together into a disturbing picture. Long-term penetration agent, positioned to compromise operations targeting Russian interests or assets. Exactly. The Syria operation, what was the target? Officially an ISIS commander. Unofficially, we were after a Russian arms dealer supplying advanced weapons to multiple terrorist groups. The kind of target Moscow would want protected without appearing to be directly involved. Emma nodded, the scenario matching known Russian intelligence tactics. They used ISIS as cover to eliminate your team while maintaining plausible deniability. And Russell provided the intelligence that made it possible. Ryan's voice had gone cold, the personal implications of this revelation settling over him like ice. His teammates hadn't died due to bad intelligence or operational missteps. They had been deliberately sacrificed by a traitor within their own command structure. We need to get this information to secure channels immediately, Emma said, her mind already calculating their next moves. My handler, Colonel Morgan, needs to... She stopped abruptly as footsteps echoed in the corridor around the corner. They both pressed back against the wall, instinctively adopting casual postures that would appear non-threatening to whoever was approaching. A maintenance technician appeared, nodding to them as he passed. "Little late for office romance, isn't it?" he commented with a knowing smile, misinterpreting their close conversation in the dimly lit corridor. "Just finishing up some work," Ryan replied, easily maintaining their cover. "Have a good night." When the technician had moved out of earshot, Emma continued in a whisper. "We need to contact Colonel Morgan through secure channels, present what we've found." "Agreed, Ida, but standard communication protocols are compromised if Russell has the surveillance authority we suspect." Emma considered their options, weighing risks against the critical importance of the intelligence they had uncovered. There's a ghost protocol dead drop system for emergency communications. Physical marker at predetermined locations indicating time and place for direct contact. Can you activate it without being detected? Yes, but it will take time. The markers needed to be placed in specific locations across the base, following established protocols to confirm they haven't been compromised. Ryan checked his watch, calculating the narrowing window before his deployment. I ship out in less than 4 days now. How quickly can you establish contact? 24 hours minimum. Morgan will be watching for the signals, but verification protocols require multiple confirmations. The urgency of their situation hung between them both, recognizing that Russell wouldn't remain passive while they gathered evidence against him. If he suspected they were investigating his past operations, he would move decisively to neutralize the threat they posed. "I'll continue gathering documentation on the compromised operations," Ryan said, "building a case that can't be dismissed as coincidence or administrative error. And I'll activate the emergency contact protocols to reach Morgan." Emma agreed. "We meet again tomorrow night, same location, 0300 hours." As they prepared to leave the maintenance corridor, separately maintaining their operational security, Ryan paused. "Be careful, Emma," he said quietly, using her first name for the first time since they'd met. "Russell survived this long because he eliminates threats before they can expose him." Emma met his gaze, seeing concern there that went beyond professional collaboration. "You too, Ryan. We've come too far to fail now." They parted ways, each returning to quarters through different routes, to avoid establishing a pattern that Russell's surveillance might detect. As Emma walked through the darkened base, she felt the weight of their discovery pressing down with almost physical force. If Russell had indeed been a Russian asset for decades, the damage to national security was incalculable. Operations Compromise agents exposed lives lost, including those of Ryan's teammates in Syria. And now, with their investigation threatening to expose him, Russell would be more dangerous than ever. The silent battle they had stumbled into had suddenly escalated from professional concern to life-or-death stakes. Emma had trained for high-risk operations, had faced dangerous adversaries in multiple theaters, but never had she confronted an enemy with the institutional power and reach that Russell commanded. As she approached her quarters, Emma noticed a staff car parked nearby, the same vehicle Colonel Morgan had used earlier. But Morgan was nowhere in sight, and the car's presence so close to Emma's quarters violated all established contact protocols. Warning signals flashed in Emma's mind. Something was wrong, dangerously wrong. Instead of continuing to her quarters, Emma diverted to a parallel pathway using the darkness and her knowledge of the base layout to approach from a different angle. From her new vantage point, she could see that her door was slightly ajar, interior lights off. Someone was inside waiting in darkness. Russell had made his move more quickly and aggressively than they had anticipated. The question now was whether Morgan had been compromised as well, or if Russell was operating without official authorization, eliminating threats to preserve his cover. Either way, Emma couldn't return to her quarters. The carefully constructed identity she had maintained for 3 years was now burned, her cover effectively blown. She needed to go to ground immediately, establish emergency communication with Ryan, and activate Ghost Protocol's extreme contingency protocols. The silent wounded woman who had never complained was now a fugitive on her own base, hunted by a senior intelligence officer with decades of experience eliminating threats. And somewhere in the darkness, Colonel Alexander Russell waited, confident that the trap he had set would soon close around the Ghost Protocol operative who had come dangerously close to exposing him. The night air carried the sharp pine scent of the North Carolina wilderness as Emma moved silently through the wooded perimeter of Fort Bragg. Her tactical training had taken over, every movement calculated, every decision filtered through years of specialized preparation for precisely this scenario, a compromised operative going dark on home territory. She had circled wide around her quarters, using the base's drainage system to move undetected past the security checkpoints. Russell's men had maintained their position at her room for 3 hours, eventually conducting a thorough search before departing with her personal effects. The message was clear: Emma Rivera was now officially a target. Temporary shelter came in the form of an equipment maintenance shed near the artillery range, locked but easily accessible to someone with her skills. The space was cramped but secure, providing the isolation she needed to assess her situation and plan her next move. Emma's immediate priority was contacting Ryan. If Russell had moved against her, he would certainly target Ryan as well, potentially accelerating his deployment to separate them permanently, or worse, arranging an accident to eliminate the threat he posed. Without secure communications, Emma's options were limited to pre-established emergency protocols in the hope that Ryan would recognize the danger before it was too late. She checked her watch, 0340 hours. Ryan would still be at the JSOC facility or en route back to his quarters. Either way, he would soon discover that the situation had escalated dramatically. Emma removed the small tactical kit she always carried, concealed a ghost protocol requirement that now proved its worth. The kit contained minimal survival supplies, emergency contact protocols, and a secure satellite communication device disguised as standard military equipment. The device was to be used only in extreme circumstances, as its activation would alert not just her handler, but the entire Ghost Protocol command structure. This qualified. Emma activated the device, inputting the authentication code that identified her status, compromised hostile. The designation would trigger immediate response protocols, alerting Colonel Morgan that Emma had been exposed and faced active threat from hostile forces. The signal would also provide her GPS coordinates, allowing extraction if circumstances permitted. With the emergency beacon active, Emma turned her attention to immediate survival needs. Russell's position gave him access to base security systems, personnel records, and surveillance resources. Standard military patrols would soon be searching for her, likely operating under the belief that she posed a security threat. She needed to evade capture long enough for Ghost Protocol to respond, or for her and Ryan to secure the evidence needed to expose Russell. Emma checked her limited supplies, calculating how long she could maintain her position. Water for 24 hours. No food, but that was a secondary concern. The maintenance shed provided temporary shelter, but she would need to relocate before dawn when regular activities resumed across the base. As she formulated her strategy, a soft vibration from the satellite device alerted her to an incoming transmission. The screen displayed a simple message: acknowledge status, viable asset, or compromised beyond recovery. The query represented standard Ghost Protocol procedure, determining whether Emma remained operational or required immediate extraction to prevent intelligence compromise. Her response would dictate the program's next actions. Emma entered her reply: viable evidence acquisition in progress, require 48 HR window. The response came almost immediately: acknowledged. Emergency contact authorization, Blackwood Arm. Operational support approved. Morgan en route. 48 HR window granted. Emma felt a surge of relief. The message confirmed several critical points. Ghost Protocol Command accepted her assessment of the situation, authorized her continued contact with Ryan, and most importantly confirmed that Colonel Morgan was responding personally rather than through administrative channels. But the 48-hour window meant that Emma and Ryan were largely on their own until Morgan arrived. They would need to secure concrete evidence of Russell's activities, evade his forces, and maintain operational security, all while Russell leveraged his considerable resources to hunt them down. Dawn was approaching. Emma gathered her minimal equipment and prepared to relocate. Her next objective was reach Ryan before Russell's people did combine their intelligence and formulate a plan to expose a traitor who had survived 4 decades without detection. Barracks area, Fort Bragg, 0530 hours. Ryan Blackwood approached his quarters with heightened awareness, instinctively noting details that others would miss: the slightly different position of his door handle, the almost imperceptible disturbance in the dust pattern on his windowsill, the presence of additional footprints leading to and from his room. Someone had entered his quarters while he was at the JSOC facility. Rather than continuing to his door, Ryan diverted to a side pathway between buildings, maintaining casual movements that wouldn't alert any watching observers. His SEAL training had prepared him for operational compromise, teaching techniques for evading surveillance and establishing alternate communication channels. The question was whether Emma had faced similar interference. Their planned meeting at 0300 hours was still several hours away, but Ryan's instincts told him that waiting was no longer an option. Russell was moving faster than anticipated, likely responding to their access of classified records at the JSOC facility. Ryan considered his options. Direct movement toward Emma's quarters would confirm any suspicions about their connection, potentially escalating the situation. Using official communication channels would create records Russell could access. He needed a method that would appear routine while conveying urgent information. The solution came in the form of the base's medical scheduling system. As Emma's assigned physical therapist, Ryan had legitimate reasons to adjust her treatment appointments. The system allowed practitioners to leave brief medical notes for patients, notes that would appear entirely professional to anyone monitoring their communications. Ryan made his way to the medical facility, his presence there at the early hour justified by his pre-deployment preparations. Once inside, he accessed the scheduling terminal and located Emma's file. In the appointment notes section, he entered PT appointment rescheduled to 0630 today due to pre-deployment requirements. Recommend immediate evaluation of previously discussed treatment options for nerve impingement. Emergency protocols indicated. The message seemed medically appropriate while conveying the essential warning, immediate danger. Implement emergency protocols. The Aero 6:30 appointment time, less than an hour away, provided a legitimate reason for Emma to approach the medical facility if she received the message. As Ryan completed the entry, the medical facility's doors opened to admit several military police officers led by a man in civilian clothes whose bearing screamed intelligence officer. Their purposeful movement toward the administrative offices suggested they were searching for someone specific. Ryan maintained his position at the terminal, continuing to enter routine medical notes as if unaware of their presence. His peripheral vision tracked their movement through the facility, noting their systematic approach to securing exits and checking identification of early morning staff. One of the MPs approached Ryan, his expression professional but alert. "Sir, may I see your identification, please?" Ryan produced his military ID with casual confidence. "Routine pre-deployment medical preparations," he explained, gesturing to the terminal where legitimate medical records were displayed. "Shipping out in a few days, just making sure my patients are reassigned properly." The MP examined the ID, comparing it to what appeared to be a list on his electronic tablet. "Thank you, sir. Be advised we're conducting a security sweep following a potential breach. Please remain in the medical facility until the all-clear is issued." "Understood," Ryan replied, betraying no concern at this development. "I have several hours of work here anyway." As the MP moved away to continue the sweep, Ryan assessed his situation with cold precision. The facility was being locked down, restricting his movement and preventing him from meeting Emma as planned. The security sweep provided legitimate cover for what was clearly a search operation targeting either him, Emma, or both. Ryan continued his work at the terminal, giving no outward sign of concern, while inwardly calculating possibilities. If Emma had received his message, she would know not to approach the medical facility directly. Ghost protocol training would include protocols for compromise scenarios. She would have alternate methods for establishing contact. The civilian leading the MPs completed his discussion with the facility administrator and turned toward the treatment areas, his gaze sweeping across the room until it locked on Ryan. The man's expression revealed nothing, but his deliberate approach confirmed Ryan's suspicion that this was no routine security operation. "Petty Officer Blackwood," the man said as he reached Ryan's position, "I'm Special Agent Harris, Defense Intelligence Agency. I need you to come with me to answer some questions regarding a security matter." Ryan maintained his professional demeanor, revealing none of the alarm bells ringing in his mind. DIA involvement suggested the situation had escalated beyond Russell's personal operation, unless this was simply another layer of his cover. "Of course, sir," Ryan replied, logging out of the medical system. "May I ask what this concerns? Operational security breach?" Harris answered curtly. "That's all I can say here." Ryan followed Harris and two MPs through the facility toward the exit, noting every detail of their formation and movement patterns. Three armed escorts for a cooperative subject suggested they considered him high risk, or that the questioning was merely a pretext for detention. As they reached the facility entrance, Ryan caught a glimpse of movement across the parade ground, a maintenance worker adjusting an electrical box on a light pole. The worker's movements were efficient and professional, yet something about the timing and positioning triggered Ryan's recognition protocols. Emma. She had received his warning and positioned herself to observe the medical facility, witnessing his detention in real time. The realization provided cold comfort. She remained free, but isolated while he was being removed from play, exactly as Russell had planned. The MPs directed Ryan into a waiting vehicle, Harris taking the seat beside him, while the others entered a second car behind them. As they pulled away from the medical facility, Ryan mentally reviewed what he knew about DIA interrogation procedures, preparing for what would likely be hours of questioning designed to break his story. What he couldn't know was whether this represented Russell's endgame or merely another move in a more complex strategy. Either way, the clock was ticking on his deployment, on Emma's security, and on their opportunity to expose a decades-long infiltration that had cost American lives, including those of his teammates in Syria. So, maintenance tunnels. Fort Bragg, 0700 hours. Emma moved through the subterranean utility corridors that connected major buildings across the base, her borrowed maintenance uniform providing both disguise and access to restricted areas. She had observed Ryan's detention from a carefully selected vantage point, confirming her worst fears about Russell's escalation. The involvement of DIA personnel rather than military police alone indicated that Russell had initiated formal counterintelligence protocols, either to legitimize his operation or because he genuinely believed they posed a security threat. Either way, the development dramatically complicated their situation. Emma needed to accomplish three critical objectives within a rapidly narrowing time frame: secure the evidence they had discovered about Russell's activities, establish direct contact with Colonel Morgan, and most immediately challenging assess Ryan's status and determine whether extraction was possible. The utility tunnels provided a secure route to the administrative complex where detainees would likely be held for questioning. Built during the Cold War and expanded during subsequent decades, the tunnel system remained largely unknown to most base personnel, used primarily by maintenance workers and emergency response teams. Emma's Ghost Protocol training had included comprehensive study of these infrastructure elements, knowledge that now provided her only advantage against Russell's superior resources. Reaching a junction beneath the administrative complex, Emma accessed a maintenance terminal to check the building's security protocols. The electronic logs confirmed her suspicion. Enhanced security measures had been implemented throughout the complex, with particular focus on the third-floor section, typically used for sensitive interrogations. Direct infiltration would be virtually impossible without triggering multiple alarms. She needed leverage, something that would force Russell to relocate Ryan or provide an opportunity for contact. The solution came from an unexpected source. The maintenance terminal displayed an automated alert for the building's environmental control system. Scheduled testing of the fire suppression systems would trigger base-wide protocols, including mandatory evacuation of detained personnel to secondary facilities. The test was scheduled for 0900 hours, less than 2 hours away. If Ryan remained in the administrative complex when the test initiated, standard procedure would require his transfer to the secondary detention facility near the eastern perimeter, a route that would take him directly past one of Emma's pre-established emergency contact points. Emma modified the maintenance schedule, slightly adjusting the testing parameters to ensure maximum disruption without raising suspicion. The changes would appear as routine administrative updates while creating the specific conditions she needed for potential contact with Ryan. With that task complete, Emma turned her attention to the evidence they had gathered. Ryan had mentioned continuing his research at the JSOC facility, potentially downloading documentation about Russell's involvement in compromise operations. If he had secured that evidence before his detention, it might still be accessible and critical to exposing Russell before he could eliminate them both. Emma made her way toward the JSOC facility using maintenance pathways to avoid security checkpoints. Her borrowed uniform and forged work orders would provide temporary cover if challenged, but direct confrontation remained a last resort. Ghost Protocol operatives were trained to evade, not engage, particularly when operating on home territory against ostensibly friendly forces. As she approached the JSOC perimeter, Emma observed increased security measures, additional patrols, enhanced ID verification, restricted access protocols. Russell was tightening his control over the base's secure facilities, limiting potential movement and communications. Infiltrating the JSOC facility under these conditions would be nearly impossible. Emma needed an alternative approach to accessing whatever evidence Ryan might have secured. The answer lay in understanding Ryan himself, how a highly trained SEAL operative would handle sensitive intelligence under threat of compromise. Standard Special Operations Protocol dictated redundant storage of critical intelligence. If Ryan had indeed secured documentation about Russell's activities, he would have created multiple copies in separate locations, at least one of which would be accessible through pre-established dead drops or emergency protocols. The challenge was determining which protocol Ryan would have selected, a decision influenced by his training, operational history, and personal tendencies. Emma had known him for less than a week, yet needed to anticipate his actions with perfect accuracy. She considered what she knew about him: naval special warfare training, 3 combat deployments, specialized medical expertise, personal loss in Syria. Each element shaped his operational thinking, influencing how he would secure critical intelligence under duress. The medical connection provided the insight she needed. Ryan's cover at Fort Bragg centered on his role as a specialized medical officer evaluating treatment protocols. Any dead drop he established would likely utilize medical infrastructure, secure, accessible, yet inconspicuous to anyone not specifically looking for it. Emma redirected her route toward the base hospital's research wing, where Ryan had mentioned conducting evaluations of combat trauma treatments. The facility would be less heavily monitored than command centers, while still providing secure storage options familiar to someone with Ryan's background. As she approached the medical complex, Emma caught sight of a security detail, establishing position near the main entrance. Not standard MPs, but specialized security forces with tactical gear and communication equipment consistent with counterintelligence operations. Russell's people deploying in anticipation of her potential movements. Emma diverted to a secondary maintenance entrance, using her forged credentials to access the building's service areas. The research wing occupied the eastern section of the third floor, accessible via service elevators typically used for equipment transport. Reaching the research level required passing through multiple security zones, each presenting increasing risk of detection. Emma moved with calculated precision, timing her progress to coincide with shift changes and scheduled maintenance activities that would mask her presence. The research wing itself presented the greatest challenge: restricted access, limited personnel, potential surveillance systems. Emma observed from a service alcove, noting the movement patterns of researchers and security personnel. The area appeared to be operating under enhanced protocols with badge verification at each internal doorway and regular security sweeps. Direct entry would almost certainly trigger alerts. Emma needed a distraction, something that would draw security attention elsewhere, while providing a brief window for access. The fire system testing scheduled for 0900 hours would affect this building as well, but Emma needed more immediate access. The solution presented itself in the form of a sample transport scheduled for 0830, a regular delivery of medical specimens from the research wing to the main laboratory. The transport would require temporary deactivation of certain security measures to allow equipment movement, creating a potential access window. Emma positioned herself near the service corridor where the transport would originate, adjusting her maintenance uniform to approximate the appearance of laboratory support staff. When the transport team began their preparations, she integrated herself into the periphery of the activity, maintaining posture and movements consistent with authorized personnel while avoiding direct interaction. As the transport team initiated security protocols for specimen movement, Emma utilized the momentary reduction in access restrictions to slip into the research wing, immediately diverting to a side corridor to avoid the main laboratory areas. The wing contained dozens of specialized research rooms, each dedicated to different aspects of combat medicine. Emma needed to identify which area Ryan would have selected for secure information storage, a location he could access legitimately while concealing non-medical intelligence. Neural regeneration researched the specialized treatment Ryan had been providing for Emma's nerve damage. The connection provided both legitimate access and personal significance that would make it memorable as a dead drop location. Emma located the Neural Research Laboratory on the facility directory, noting its position in the northeast corner of the research wing. Moving with purpose that suggested authorized presence, she navigated the corridors, maintaining awareness of security camera positions and personnel movements. The Neural Research Lab was occupied by two researchers, both focused on equipment at the far end of the room. Emma paused at the doorway, assessing the situation. Direct entry risked immediate challenge, but the researchers' positioning offered limited visibility of certain storage areas. Emma waited for a moment when both researchers were engaged in their work, then entered with confident movements suggesting routine purpose. She moved directly to the supply storage area, maintaining posture and expressions that communicated belonging while scanning for anything out of ordinary placement. The storage cabinets contained standard medical supplies organized with military precision. Nothing appeared immediately unusual until Emma noticed a specimen container with labeling slightly different from the others, the font spacing marginally wider, the barcode position shifted by millimeters. Subtle differences that would be imperceptible to anyone not specifically looking for irregularities. Emma retrieved the container, maintaining casual movements as she verified its contents. Inside, disguised among legitimate medical samples, was a secure digital storage device of the type used for classified intelligence transfer. Ryan had indeed secured the evidence and established a dead drop exactly as Special Operations Protocol dictated. Emma returned the container to its position, memorizing its exact placement. Direct retrieval now would risk immediate detection. She would need to return during the fire system testing, when the lab would be temporarily evacuated. Exiting the lab with the same purposeful confidence, Emma made her way back toward the service areas, mind already calculating her next moves. The fire system testing would create simultaneous opportunities, potential contact with Ryan during his transfer, and retrieval of the evidence he had secured. But first she needed to establish position near the route Ryan would be transported along, assuming Russell's people followed standard security protocols rather than creating specialized procedures to maintain isolation. As Emma navigated the maintenance corridors toward her selected observation position, her satellite communication device vibrated with an incoming message. Morgan ETA 1200 hours. Maintain operational status. Authorization for evidence. Acquisition confirmed. The message validated Emma's course of action while establishing a critical timeline. Colonel Morgan would arrive at midday, potentially bringing resources and authority that could counter Russell's operation. Emma and Ryan needed to secure and protect the evidence. Until then, evidence that could expose a decades-long penetration of American military intelligence. Reaching her observation position overlooking the administrative complex's security exit, Emma settled in to wait for the fire system testing to begin. In less than 30 minutes, the scheduled protocols would create the conditions necessary for her to potentially make contact with Ryan during his transfer. What she couldn't know was whether Ryan remained in the administrative complex at all, or if Russell had already implemented measures to ensure their permanent separation. Detention Facility Administrative Complex, 0850 hours. Ryan sat motionless in the sparse interrogation room, maintaining the calm composure that had served him through multiple high-stress situations. For the past 2 hours, DIA Special Agent Harris had conducted a textbook counterintelligence interview. Circular questions, apparent non sequiturs, implied connections between unrelated events, all designed to identify inconsistencies in Ryan's responses. Thus far, Ryan had provided exactly what would be expected from a SEAL medic temporarily assigned to Fort Bragg: detailed descriptions of his medical research, acknowledgement of his treatment of Emma Rivera for standard injuries, and appropriate confusion about why these activities warranted DIA investigation. "Let's go over your interactions with Private Rivera again," Harris said, reviewing notes from earlier questioning. "You described her injury as a standard rappelling accident, yet your treatment protocols included techniques typically reserved for specialized combat trauma. Why? As I explained previously," Ryan replied with professional patience, "Private Rivera's injuries included nerve impingement that responded poorly to standard treatment. The specialized techniques represent part of my research into improved field medical protocols, exactly what my assignment at Fort Bragg was designed to evaluate." Harris made a notation, his expression revealing nothing. "And your access to the JSOC facility last night that was also related to your medical research." "Pre-deployment preparation," Ryan confirmed. "Reviewing threat assessments for my upcoming assignment, including regional medical challenges that might affect operational planning." At 2 in the morning, special operations personnel maintain irregular schedules, Agent Harris. "I'm sure that's not news to you." The subtle reference to Harris's obvious familiarity with special operations procedures was calculated, establishing that Ryan recognized the interrogation techniques being employed without directly challenging their legitimacy. Harris was formulating his next question when the facility's alarm system activated the distinctive pattern indicating non-emergency protocols rather than actual threat. A moment later, an announcement confirmed, "Attention all personnel, fire suppression system testing will commence in 5 minutes. Please follow evacuation protocols for your respective areas." "This is a scheduled test only." Harris frowned at the interruption. "Wait here," he instructed, stepping outside to confer with the security personnel stationed in the corridor. Ryan remained seated, outwardly relaxed while mentally alert to the changing situation. Fire system testing represented standard base maintenance, but the timing was suspiciously convenient, creating mandatory movement protocols precisely when Ryan was being held in isolation. The possibility that Emma had engineered this situation was high. Ghost protocol training would include techniques for manipulating base infrastructure systems to create operational advantages. If Emma remained free and aware of Ryan's detention, this represented a logical tactic to force security personnel to move him according to predictable protocols. Harris returned his expression, suggesting mild annoyance at the procedural requirements. "We need to relocate temporarily," he explained. "Standard protocol during system testing. We'll resume our discussion at the secondary facility." Ryan stood maintaining the cooperative demeanor of someone with nothing to hide. "Of course." Two armed security personnel entered to escort them, positioning themselves with professional precision that revealed advanced training. Not standard MPs, but specialized security. Russell's people, almost certainly. They proceeded through the administrative complex toward the designated evacuation route, following corridors that would lead eventually to the transportation area, where vehicles waited to transfer personnel to secondary facilities. Ryan maintained situational awareness without obvious scanning, noting security positions, camera placements, and potential choke points. As they approached the building's security exit, Ryan observed subtle indications of surveillance, focus, security personnel positioning that suggested expectation of potential incident communication patterns consistent with heightened alert status. Russell was anticipating something or someone at this specific location. Emma. She had positioned herself along this route, expecting Ryan's transfer during the system testing. The realization was both concerning and affirming. Emma remained free, but was potentially moving into a trap specifically designed to capture her. Ryan needed to warn her without alerting his escorts. As they passed through the final security checkpoint before exiting the building, he implemented a tactic developed during SEAL operations in hostile territory, a controlled medical episode that would appear genuine while creating tactical advantage. "I need a moment," Ryan said, his voice strained as he pressed his hand against his left shoulder, the location of his actual Syria injury. Old shrapnel wound acting up. Harris looked skeptical, but the medical reference activated standard protocols. Even counterintelligence operations required appropriate response to medical issues, particularly for decorated combat veterans. "Take a minute," Harris allowed, gesturing to a bench positioned against the corridor wall, coincidentally providing clear line of sight to the exterior plaza where vehicles waited. Ryan sat, maintaining the appearance of managing genuine pain while scanning the exterior area through the security exit's reinforced glass panels. The plaza contained standard transport vehicles, additional security personnel and tactical positioning, and crucially maintenance workers preparing barricades for the temporary evacuation route. Among those workers, almost imperceptible unless specifically sought, was a figure whose movements carried the distinctive efficiency Emma had displayed during their training sessions. She was positioned perfectly to observe the security exit while maintaining cover identity among legitimate maintenance personnel. Ryan needed to communicate the danger without direct signaling that would alert his escorts. The solution came in the form of the medical narrative. He had established a genuine combat injury, providing cover for controlled communication. "Syrian IED fragments," Ryan explained to Harris, who maintained professional interest despite obvious suspicion about the timing. "Doctors couldn't get all the pieces, acts up sometimes, especially during weather changes." The reference to Syria, specifically mentioning IED fragments, would alert Emma to the connection with their earlier discussions about Russell's compromise of that operation. Weather changes represented standard operational code for surveillance conditions, warning her about the heightened security presence. "We need to keep moving," Harris prompted, after allowing the minimum appropriate response time to Ryan's apparent discomfort. Ryan nodded, standing with deliberately careful movements that extended their time and visual range of the exterior plaza. "I'm good, just hits unexpectedly sometimes." As they proceeded toward the exit, Ryan made one final observation designed to reach Emma without alerting his escorts. "Pressure changes affect it. Low front coming in always intensifies." The meteorological reference contained the essential warning: low front coming, increased pressure, intensified surveillance trap ahead. Emma's training would decode the message immediately, warning her to abort any direct contact attempt. They passed through the security exit onto the plaza, moving toward the waiting vehicles under the watchful eyes of Russell's security detail. Ryan maintained awareness of Emma's position without direct observation, noting through peripheral vision that she had adjusted her activities to avoid direct intersection with their route. Message received. She would maintain distance, avoiding the trap Russell had established to capture her during Ryan's transfer. The fire system testing had provided the opportunity for visual confirmation of Ryan's status without risking direct contact under heightened surveillance. As they reached the transport vehicle, Ryan noted another maintenance worker approaching from the administrative building, distinctive in that he moved with purpose toward their specific location rather than maintaining the general activity patterns of the other workers. The man reached their position just as Harris was directing Ryan toward the vehicle's rear door. "Sir," the worker addressed Harris directly, "Control says to hold transport temporarily." They're showing an alarm trigger in Section 5 that needs clearance before evacuation continues. Harris frowned, checking his communication device. I didn't receive any notification. Systems experiencing delays with the testing protocols, the worker explained with the practiced patience of someone accustomed to infrastructure challenges. They're routing communications through backup channels to avoid interference. The explanation was technically plausible yet perfectly designed to create hesitation and confusion, hallmarks of Ghost Protocol tactics for disrupting adversary operations without direct confrontation. Emma had created not just visual contact opportunity, but a deliberate delay in Ryan's transfer, extending their proximity while Russell's security personnel adjusted to changing protocols. The question was, what tactical advantage did this brief delay provide? The answer came as the maintenance worker handed Harris a clipboard with documentation requiring verification, signature standard procedure for security exceptions during evacuation protocols. As Harris reviewed the paperwork, the worker's position placed him directly beside Ryan for a critical moment. Medical storage device, the worker murmured, voice barely audible and lips barely moving. Neural lab, Morgan 1200 hours. Colonel Morgan arriving at noon, evidence secured in the Neural Research Laboratory. Critical information transferred in less than 5 seconds with no observable communication that would trigger security protocols. The maintenance worker, clearly another Ghost Protocol operative Emma had contacted through emergency channels, completed the paperwork exchange with Harris and departed with the routine efficiency of base support personnel, leaving no indication of the intelligence transfer that had just occurred. Harris directed Ryan into the transport vehicle, clearly annoyed by the procedural complications, but maintaining professional focus on his primary responsibility, keeping Ryan isolated and under control until the counterintelligence investigation concluded. As the vehicle departed the administrative complex, Ryan processed the information he had received while maintaining outward cooperation with his escorts. Emma had secured his position, identified the evidence location, and confirmed Colonel Morgan's imminent arrival. The pieces were in place for potential resolution if they could maintain operational security for approximately 3 more hours. What Ryan couldn't know was whether Emma had recognized the full extent of the trap Russell had set, not just the obvious security presence around the administrative complex, but the more subtle operation unfolding across the base as Russell's decades of counterintelligence experience focused on eliminating the threat to his position. Because Russell wasn't just hunting Emma now. He was systematically eliminating every potential witness contact and evidence source that could connect him to Russian intelligence operations, including the JSOC facility where Ryan had accessed the damning records. The countdown to Morgan's arrival had become a race against Russell's methodical elimination of everything that could expose him. A race Emma was fighting alone until Ryan could engineer his own escape from custody. Neural Research Laboratory, 10:30 hours. Emma moved through the medical complex with heightened caution, aware that Russell's operation had expanded significantly in the hours since Ryan's detention. The fire system testing had concluded, returning the base to normal operations while providing Emma with critical information about Ryan's status and the location of the evidence they needed. The successful transmission of this intelligence through another Ghost Protocol operative had confirmed that emergency protocols were functioning. Colonel Morgan had received Emma's initial alert and deployed resources in response. But until Morgan arrived personally, Emma operated without direct support against an adversary with decades of counterintelligence experience and institutional authority that grew more formidable by the hour. Reaching the research wing required navigating increasingly stringent security measures. Russell had expanded his surveillance network beyond the administrative complex to include medical facilities, a logical progression if he suspected the evidence Ryan had secured might be stored in medical research areas. Emma's maintenance uniform provided diminishing cover as security personnel conducted identification verification at key access points. She diverted to alternative routes, utilizing service areas and emergency access pathways to approach the Neural Research Laboratory from a less monitored direction. The laboratory itself presented a critical challenge, retrieving the evidence without triggering security protocols that would immediately alert Russell's operation. Emma observed from a maintenance alcove as security personnel conducted a sweep of the research wing, their movements suggesting specific search parameters rather than routine verification. They were looking for something or someone with focused intensity. Russell had somehow identified the neural laboratory as a potential location of interest, though his personnel didn't appear to have pinpointed the exact evidence storage site within the facility. Emma needed a distraction, something significant enough to draw security personnel away from the laboratory temporarily without triggering base-wide protocols that would lock down the facility entirely. The solution required precision timing and calculated risk. Using her maintenance access, Emma reached the building's environmental control systems, specifically the oxygen monitoring equipment that regulated laboratory safety protocols. A minor adjustment to the monitoring system would trigger localized alerts indicating potential oxygen depletion in a specific laboratory section, a serious safety concern requiring immediate response, but isolated enough to avoid base-wide security escalation. Emma implemented the adjustment, setting the alert to activate in the pathology laboratory at the opposite end of the research wing from the neural facility. The timing provided a critical 5-minute window long enough to retrieve the evidence, while security personnel responded to the apparent safety emergency, but brief enough to avoid triggering verification protocols that would identify the alert as false. When the oxygen alert activated, security personnel responded as anticipated, moving with urgent purpose toward the pathology laboratory. Emma utilized the momentary reduction in surveillance to access the neural research facility, moving directly to the storage cabinet where Ryan had concealed the evidence. The specimen container remained exactly as she had observed it previously, its subtle irregularities distinguishing it from surrounding medical samples. Emma retrieved the container, confirming the presence of the digital storage device, hidden among legitimate medical specimens. As she secured the device, Emma became aware of a shift in activity patterns outside the laboratory, not the expected return of security personnel from the pathology section, but new movement suggesting altered response protocols. Someone had identified the oxygen alert as a diversionary tactic and redirected security resources accordingly. Emma adjusted, immediately abandoning her planned exit route in favor of emergency evacuation pathways typically used for hazardous material incidents. These pathways, designed for rapid personnel movement during genuine emergencies, bypass standard security checkpoints while providing direct access to exterior areas. Reaching a service exit, Emma encountered unexpected security presence. 2 personnel positioned specifically to monitor emergency pathways, their tactical positioning indicating awareness of potential evasion routes. Russell's counterintelligence experience was evident in this comprehensive coverage of alternative exit strategies. Emma diverted again, moving deeper into the research wing's internal structure, utility spaces and maintenance corridors that connected to the building's subterranean infrastructure. These areas, designed for service access rather than personnel movement, offered reduced surveillance at the cost of limited movement options and potential containment. As Emma navigated these restricted spaces, her satellite communication device vibrated with an urgent message. Morgan arrival accelerated. ETA 1100 hours. Evidence secure protocol activated. Transmit immediately. The message indicated both increased urgency and a critical procedural shift. Rather than physically delivering the evidence to Morgan upon arrival, Emma was being directed to transmit the data immediately through Ghost Protocol's secure emergency channels, a procedure reserved for situations where physical evidence transfer carried unacceptable risk of loss. The transmission would require specialized equipment, access, and temporary signal vulnerability, both significant concerns within a facility now under Russell's concentrated surveillance. Emma needed a location with both appropriate technical infrastructure and sufficient security isolation to prevent immediate detection during transmission. The medical complex's communication center provided both elements, but accessing it meant moving back through areas of increased security presence, directly counter to tactical logic, yet potentially unexpected enough to succeed precisely because of its apparent recklessness. Emma adjusted her approach, utilizing her understanding of security response patterns to identify momentary gaps in coverage. Russell's operation, while comprehensive, remained constrained by available personnel and the necessity of maintaining plausible operational justification within a functioning military base. Reaching the communication center required passing through 3 security zones, each presenting unique challenges. Emma utilized a combination of maintenance credentials, timed movement coordinated with shift changes, and calculated risk assessment to navigate these obstacles without triggering direct confrontation. The communication center itself operated under standard military protocols rather than enhanced security, its routine functions deemed less critical to Russell's immediate objectives. Emma accessed a secondary terminal, using maintenance authorization codes connecting the digital storage device while establishing the encrypted transmission protocols, Ghost protocol, utilized for emergency data transfer. The data upload began immediately transferring the evidence Ryan had secured about Russell's involvement in compromised operations directly to Ghost Protocol's secure servers. The transmission created momentary vulnerability, detectable electronic activity that sophisticated surveillance systems might identify, but provided the essential guarantee that the evidence would reach appropriate authorities regardless of Emma and Ryan's ultimate fate. As the transmission completed, Emma received confirmation of successful data transfer and warning of detected surveillance activity targeting the communication center systems. Russell's technical resources had identified the transmission in progress, though not necessarily its specific origin within the facility. Emma disconnected the device, restoring the terminal to standard operational status while securing the physical evidence in her maintenance kit. The original storage device remained valuable as verification of the transmitted data, proof that the evidence had been obtained through legitimate access rather than manipulation. Exiting the communication center required heightened caution as security personnel would now be responding to the detected transmission activity. Emma utilized service pathways to avoid main corridors, maintaining awareness of security movement patterns through observation of communication signals and personnel deployment indicators. Her objective now was reaching the designated rendezvous point for Colonel Morgan's arrival, the transportation hub near the base's north perimeter, selected for its multiple access routes and limited surveillance coverage. The location provided optimal conditions for secure transfer of physical evidence while minimizing exposure to Russell's expanding security operation. As Emma navigated toward this objective, her satellite communication device delivered a final update: Morgan on base. JSOC facility compromised. Blackwood extraction priority alpha. Proceed to secondary rendezvous. The message contained critical new intelligence. The JSOC facility where Ryan had accessed the evidence against Russell had been compromised, potentially destroyed or altered to eliminate supporting evidence beyond what Ryan had secured. More urgently, Ryan's status had been elevated to priority extraction, indicating imminent threat to his safety beyond standard detention. Russell was accelerating his endgame, moving to eliminate witnesses and evidence before Morgan's arrival could constrain his actions through official channels. Ryan's value as a witness to the Syria operation compromise made him a primary target now that the evidence had been secured and transmitted. Emma redirected toward the secondary rendezvous point, a maintenance facility near the base airfield, where arriving personnel could be processed without standard administrative procedures. The location would provide Morgan with both secure arrival conditions and immediate operational capability to address the escalating situation. Reaching the facility required crossing exposed terrain between major base sections movement that carried increased risk of detection by both ground personnel and aerial surveillance assets. Emma utilized a maintenance vehicle to provide both transportation and cover identity, calculating that direct movement with appropriate authorization would draw less attention than covert approaches that might trigger surveillance alerts. As she approached the rendezvous point, Emma observed increased security activity throughout the base movement patterns, suggesting coordinated response to specific threats rather than general alert status. Russell was implementing containment protocols, establishing perimeters around key facilities, while deploying tactical teams to secure potential evidence locations. The secondary rendezvous facility appeared secure upon initial approach, with standard maintenance personnel visible and no obvious security presence. Emma maintained caution, nonetheless conducting counter-surveillance assessment before approaching directly verification procedures that revealed subtle indications of observation focused on the facility's main entrance. Emma diverted to a secondary access point, utilizing maintenance credentials to enter through service areas rather than administrative sections. The facility's interior contained the expected maintenance equipment and personnel, but also military personnel with the distinctive bearing of Special Operations Forces. Ghost Protocol Extraction Team deployed in advance of Morgan's arrival to secure the rendezvous point. A woman in civilian attire stood at the center of this operation, directing personnel with the quiet authority of senior command. Colonel Victoria Morgan, Emma's handler and Ghost Protocol's operational director, had arrived ahead of schedule, already implementing countermeasures against Russell's expanding security operation. Rivera, Morgan acknowledged as Emma approached her tone, reflecting professional focus rather than personal concern. Transmission received and authenticated. Physical evidence. Emma produced the digital storage device maintaining protocol despite the urgency of their situation. Complete data set secured from Neural Research Laboratory as indicated by Blackwood. Morgan nodded, handing the device to a technical specialist for immediate verification. Blackwood's status: detained by DIA personnel under Russell's authority, transported to secondary facility during fire system testing. Current location unconfirmed, but presumed to be detention center near eastern perimeter. Russell's objective: elimination of evidence and witnesses connecting him to compromised operations, particularly Syria mission, where Blackwood's team was ambushed. Assessment indicates Russian intelligence connection dating to Cold War period, potentially facilitated by Viktor Kaminsky. Morgan's expression hardened at the mention of Kaminsky, the suspected double agent who had mentored Russell during his early NSA career. Kaminsky connection confirmed by transmitted data. Russell was recruited during Moscow posting in 1985, maintained as long-term asset through post-Soviet transition. The confirmation validated everything Emma and Ryan had pieced together from fragmented intelligence. Russell wasn't just a security risk, but a decades-long penetration agent who had compromised countless operations while rising through military intelligence ranks. Extraction team is moving on detention facility now. Morgan continued, turning to a tactical display showing real-time positioning of personnel across the base. Russell's security operation has been designated unauthorized by JSOC command. All base personnel have been instructed to stand down and return to standard protocols. The display showed Russell's security teams maintaining positions. Despite these orders, confirmation that Russell had moved beyond legitimate authority into rogue operation status, utilizing personal loyalty and operational momentum to maintain control despite official intervention. Russell himself, Emma asked, identifying the critical vulnerability in their developing countermeasures. Last confirmed location was JSOC facility approximately 40 minutes ago. Current whereabouts unknown. Morgan's tone reflected the significant security implications of this uncertainty. Assessment suggests he's implementing final containment protocols before attempting to leave the base. The tactical display updated with new intelligence showing security alert at the detention facility where Ryan was being held. The extraction team had encountered resistance from personnel still following Russell's directives, despite countermanding orders from legitimate command authorities. Blackwood's status, Emma pressed, recognizing the escalating risk to Ryan as Russell's operation collapsed around him. Morgan studied the incoming tactical data with practiced assessment. Extraction team reports detention facility in lockdown. Blackwood's presence confirmed, but access restricted by security protocols. Facility administrator demanding verification from higher authority before releasing detainee. The bureaucratic response represented exactly the delay Russell would have anticipated, procedural obstacles that would prevent Ryan's release until Russell could implement whatever contingency plans he had prepared for operational compromise. "I need to go," Emma stated the declaration, both request for authorization and statement of intent. Her training experience and specific knowledge of the situation made her uniquely qualified to navigate the rapidly evolving scenario, particularly regarding Ryan's extraction. Morgan assessed the request with cold calculation, weighing operational requirements against protocol and risk. Authorized. Tactical support will coordinate through standard channels. Primary objective remains Blackwood's secure extraction. Secondary objective is Russell's apprehension if opportunity presents without compromising primary. Emma nodded, accepting both the authorization and its limitations. Ghost Protocol prioritized mission success over individual action, even when that action involved personal risk to achieve critical objectives. As Emma prepared to depart, Morgan added a final observation that carried unexpected personal acknowledgement beneath its professional assessment. "Your partnership with Blackwood demonstrated exceptional operational synergy despite minimal preparation. The program will consider implications for future deployment methodologies." The statement represented the closest thing to approval that Ghost Protocol's rigid operational structure allowed recognition that Emma and Ryan's connection had produced valuable intelligence despite violating traditional compartmentalization protocols. Emma acknowledged the assessment without response, focusing instead on the immediate tactical requirements for Ryan's extraction. As she departed the rendezvous facility, her mind calculated approach vectors, security vulnerabilities, and contingency plans for the detention center where Ryan was held. What she couldn't know was that Russell had anticipated this exact scenario: the official intervention, the extraction attempt, the effort to secure Ryan as a witness against decades of intelligence compromise. His final contingency wasn't escape but elimination, ensuring that no one who could testify about his activities remained to expose operations that had cost countless American lives, including a SEAL team in Syria that had walked into an ambush because of intelligence Russell had personally verified. The silent, wounded woman who never complained was now racing against a desperate traitor, implementing his final act of betrayal, the elimination of evidence that would expose a lifetime of deception and the witnesses who could confirm it. And somewhere in a detention facility designed to hold America's enemies, Ryan Blackwood waited, knowing that his survival depended on Emma reaching him before Russell's operation concluded with one final casualty. Detention facility perimeter, 11:45 hours. Emma arrived at the detention facility moments before Morgan's tactical team secured the perimeter. The extraction unfolded with the precision that defined Ghost Protocol operations: swift, methodical, and leaving minimal evidence of their presence. Within the facility, Russell had made his final desperate move. Emma found Ryan in a secure holding cell, a lethal dose of what appeared to be a military-grade nerve agent prepared for injection, disguised as standard medical treatment for his continuing questioning. The syringe lay broken on the floor beside an unconscious guard, evidence of Ryan's SEAL training, overcoming even the most secure containment protocols. "Took you long enough," Ryan said, his voice calm despite the circumstances. His eyes, however, revealed both relief and something deeper that hadn't been there during their previous encounters. "Had to stop for coffee," Emma replied, with the ghost of a smile, the first genuine one Ryan had seen from her. Russell himself was intercepted, attempting to board a military transport plane bound for a NATO conference in Brussels, his final escape route leveraging decades of cultivated credentials and connections. The evidence Emma and Ryan had secured proved decisive, revealing not only his involvement in the Syria ambush, but a pattern of compromised operations spanning over 30 years to operations that had cost hundreds of American lives and countless intelligence assets. Naval Special Warfare Command, Coronado. 6 months later, the Pacific sunset painted the horizon in brilliant orange and crimson as Emma walked along the beach, the San Diego skyline shimmering in the distance. Her shoulder had healed completely, the specialized treatments Ryan had provided, ensuring full recovery of both nerve function and mobility. She spotted him waiting at their usual meeting spot, his tall figure silhouetted against the fading light. Since the events at Fort Bragg, they had been assigned as the first operational pair in a new joint program, codenamed Sentinel Protocol, that formalized the partnership model their unexpected connection had demonstrated. "New assignment," Ryan said as she approached, handing her a sealed folder with the distinctive markings of classified intelligence. "Morgan says we're the only team qualified for this one." Emma took the folder, her fingers brushing his in a touch that lingered longer than strictly necessary. The woman who had once carried the burden of secrecy alone now shared it with someone who understood both her strength and the weight she carried. "Partners," she asked, the single word carrying layers of meaning beyond their professional relationship. Ryan's eyes met hers with the same intensity he had shown during their first meeting in the examination room, when he had seen through her carefully constructed facade to the person beneath. "Partners," he confirmed as they walked together toward the waiting transport that would carry them to their next mission, no longer silent, no longer alone.